Welcome to episode 10 of the Self-Reg Show. And we're happy to be here with you again. I'm Susan Hopkins and here with Stuart Shanker. It's very exciting to tell you that you're going to start hearing some other voices mixed into to the Self-Reg podcast. I've got Angie Rosati, Dr. Rosati up next week for an interview. So you'll be starting to hear some other voices. So please click follow us, leave us your comments, reach out if you have any ideas or any requests. All of it really, really helps us. So we left you last time. I think we named the podcast afterwards, what do you do when the cup is broken, which was a bit of a joke, right? But I mean, in all seriousness, it was, thinking about, we started in January, thinking about a January, well-being, let's fill the, filling the empty cup. And you led us through this thinking about coffee, which I always love, Stuart. It's like we're talking about that, and you literally took the metaphor and taught us something new, and it took us in all kinds of interesting ways. But last time I opened up, and we're not going to talk about me this time, but I just want to full circle that because I have had some people reach out, and I opened up about what a hard time mental health wise, and mental health is health, so it's got physical health too, right? I've had for a little while now, and we talked about what do you do when the cup is broken, so there is no cup to fill, and it was sort of a metaphor, but it led us to thinking about a lot of things and exploring, okay, how can self-reg help, because self-reg has definitely helped me. And it helps me figure, it doesn't give me all the answers, it gives me all the questions and helps me sort of I fumble, at times, find my way through, see things differently, wonder different things. And it's definitely been an anchor for me. There's just no doubt about it. And it will be for life. It's not like, a one-off at all. So this time, though, we're going to talk about the topic of energy. So we throw that word around a lot. We definitely teach about energy, Stuart, in lots of our courses. Anybody who's learned the Thayer matrix. Maybe you've had a few minutes dialogue on it, or maybe you've gone in depth and really sort of a deeper dive into it. And we have in our glossary, we'll pin up our glossary, we have our definition of it. And I mean, it fits into lots of the things that we talk about. But this is one of those words that we kind of all throw around. If I take myself back a couple of decades, when people hear energy, they instantly go, ooh. Right? I was in natural health in the natural health industry before I went into education, right? And everybody was like this sort of, we're talking about that. And when we think about it, it's really, it's the science understanding of what energy is. But I sent you a quote I saw last week somewhere on social media that kind of resonated, even though I'm very clear that it's probably a little very off from the science, and that wouldn't be for me to understand or explain. That's always on you. But it was a saying that said we aren't our our chronological age. Which often you hear you're not your chronological, you're your biological age. And I know, like, I've had tests for this done, and they test your balance and certain kind of indicators of a biological age. But this said instead, you are your energy. And wow, did that kind of hit home on that particular day. And I sent it to you. I never know what you're going to respond. Sometimes you're like, I love it. Lots of times you make me think about something differently, or you'll ask a new question, but you're like, that's not too bad. So let's start with that. And first of all, how are you? Maybe you want to introduce your pup to all of those that are watching this on video. On our YouTube channel.
That's my wife's dog, but she's taken over my lap.
So where would you like to start us today, Stuart?
Well, you said something to me this week that I thought was a great topic for today's podcast, and that was just how many people are feeling burned out. So hands up if you're feeling burned out.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And so one of the points I was making in my response in the exchanges that Susan and I had was our goal in these podcasts is really to talk about how self-reg sees things a little differently. And our hope is that once you begin to see things differently, you start to do things differently and maybe come up with strategies for something like feeling burned out that are so much more effective than what we're used to. So that was kind of my goal for today, and I thought I'd pick up from where I left off. So what Susan and I talked about when we were talking about, the Crack Cup podcast was how caffeine actually works. I'm not going to repeat any of that. But the point is that, the brain is a pretty, and the body, pretty remarkable self-regulating mechanisms. And what that means in simple terms is you can't trick the brain. So let's take as an example. Um, uh, there was a period a couple of years ago where I was having dark chocolate every single night, and I loved it. And I couldn't wait until that period after dinner when I could have um, my fix. And the fix seemed to get a little bigger and bigger every time. But then something weird happened, and that was that I developed a pretty significant sleep problem.
Mhm.
So I thought, well, this is a sign that I'm overstressed. Maybe I need more dark chocolate. But the scientist in me thought, well, maybe you should do a little digging. And the first thing I found was that dark chocolate has a remarkably high level of caffeine. So, okay, I thought I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to go a couple nights without any dark chocolate at all and see if I sleep better. And I did. So I'm someone who's very sensitive to. I'm very sensitive to caffeine. In fact, I can't have caffeine, as you know, Susan. I can't have it past 10 a.m. But then I really got curious about the other aspects of. By the way, I switched from caffeine, from dark chocolate to licorice all sorts.
Is that any better?
No, well, then I had a couple of good days where I hadn't eaten anything, and then I started to get into trouble again. So then I was interested in the effect of sugar, and so that's what I wanted to talk
Sugar.
about
I thought we
today.
were doing energy.
Well, because we turn to sugar
There's
for
always a link.
energy,
It's for those of you
right?
listening and wondering. It's like, did they actually talk? The truth is that we go back. We actually don't plan any of the videos we do a whole lot in advance. We certainly have a conversation about them, but I never title anything with Stuart until I've had a chance to do it, because it always leads in some different direction. So it's actually part of the joy for me. Maybe just regulating for some of you, but it shows you that I'm literally on the learning journey with you and looking to see where he's going to take us next. So
So I'm going to take us into the topic of
yeah,
hyperglycemia. That's right. Okay, so let's say I'm really feeling burned out, and so what I do is maybe I have a high sugar cereal for breakfast, or I have a couple of teaspoons of sugar in my coffee, or whatever. And yeah, that gives me a nice little burst of energy, and then I feel worse. Okay, so we all know that, right? So we all know that you get a sugar spike, a glucose spike, and then you feel even more tired. And there's a reason for that. And it's a self regulating mechanism in the brain. So, what happens when we, by the way, this is all heading towards a self reg conclusion. So, what happens when we get a little bit of hyperglycemia? And all that means is that the glucose levels in our blood are higher than that sort of sweet spot in our blood sugar thermostat. Okay, so we get a momentary burst of energy and then we plummet. And the reason why we plummet, there's a couple of reasons why we plummet. One is we have another system deep inside the brain that I've never talked about with you called the orexin system. And this is a relatively recent discovery. I think it's only like 2019. But essentially, the orexin system, what it does is it makes you feel full of energy. It wakes you up. And one of the effects of hyperglycemia is it suppresses the orexin neurons. Well, that makes sense, right? So you've got this self-regulating mechanism that says, well, I've got enough energy in my blood, so I don't need to be producing orexin. I'm going to bring it down. So that's one of the first consequences. I'm not getting that natural, that internal source of energy. But then there's something else that happens. And the other thing is that our brain doesn't like too much sugar in the bloodstream. And so it's got to get rid of it. And it gets rid of it by, as everybody knows, it gets rid of it by producing insulin. And so now what's happened is our brain goes into sort of, it's working very hard now to get our blood sugar levels back to normal, back to safety. Otherwise, it can cause damage. It can cause neuronal damage. Okay, so for my little bit of a quick shot, a quick boost, I'm paying a long term. I'm paying a long term cost, and in fact, so long term that I can wake up the next morning and there's an awful lot of neurochemical imbalance. So some mistakes that I made have resulted in a dysregulation, a neural dysregulation that the brain now has to work very hard. It has to burn a lot of energy to correct. If you look at all of the popular strategies for getting yourself out of that burnout state, um, whether it's triggering dopamine, whether it's consuming sugar, um, they all give a short-term boost and then long-term depletion. So burnout's telling us something, and burnout's telling us that it's a warning sign. It's a signal that we are overstressed, that we have been doing things to deal, we have been using maladaptive ways of self-regulation to try to counter that feeling of burnout. And the overall effect is we've got too much cortisol, we've got not enough natural serotonin, and so on and so on. So we have to reset the system. In other words, burnout is really functional. Burnout is telling us that my system has really been pushed too hard. And there's all kinds of things that push it too hard. Um, Susan raised her hand as one of the ones that burned out. Well, anyone who knows Susan was not in the least surprised. Uh, I mean, so much going on in her personal life, but then on top of that, doing the work of 20 sane people. And on top of all that, the news has been really, really punishing, and Susan is someone who takes it all very seriously. All of us can tell a similar story. Too much, not doing the right things. So that's where I wanted to lead Susan now. Okay, so we've got this state, this burnout state, which is telling us that three things have happened. One, our stress has been too high. Two, we've relied on things that uh, do not give real energy. They only give us short term, and then we end up worse. And three, we're not getting the things that we do need. We're not, this is step three of self-reg, which is reduce the stress load. And there's various ways that you do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to reframe, and I'm going to pause now and let Susan respond to all this. We're going to reframe that very interesting quotation that she started with. You are, I can't remember the exact words, but you are the energy that you have. That's your real age. And so what we want to know is, what is the self-reg method of restoring energy so that we really are overcoming our burnout? We're not going for that quick fix. We're not going for that temporary relief. We're going for, the method that I wake up tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and I really have overcome my burnout. I've responded to it in a way that doesn't just feel younger, but in a very real sense, I am younger. And that's where I wanted us to
So I
go.
feverishly make notes whenever Stuart talks, and they take me all over the map, in my thinking. But one that I just want to start with is, I know that there are some folks. There's books out there now about saying, the idea of burnout isn't a real thing. And I'll just use an example for me, from a couple of weeks ago, of when. When we're talking about it in self-reg, we're both aligned with that and giving you something to focus on in a deeper way. Like, I described what I was experiencing as like having an anxiety attack, and it didn't meet
Yeah.
the criteria of panic attack, but I could feel it in my body. And when I talked to Stuart and looked things up, and it's not really a medical term, but it conveys an internal experience. And I just want to emphasize that, because I think burnout is the same thing. I sometimes will say about being on the brink of burnout, like I'm holding it off, but we all know what it feels like, that no matter, like, you're tired, the tired but wired, you go to sleep and you wake up and you're not feeling the energy for the day, and that goes on and on and on. And it's that sort of, there's a subjectivity to it. And yet, I think what Stuart is telling us and leading us to is, it's not just subjective. There's some things going on inside us and individual differences. So, there's a whole lot that, the way that we're wired. So I got to ask just a couple of questions. The dark chocolate made me.
Okay,
I did
nope.
not know about that. I know about you and your butter brickle ice cream, because you talked about it in one of our in early days in university, I think. But I didn't know the dark chocolate, and it always makes me think of, probably the other great mentor in my life. There's been many, but the two that always rise to the top when I think about influencing me in all kinds of ways, and supporting me, I guess, mentoring me, is you, and the other one is Nancy Gibson, Dr. Nancy Gibson, now retired. She's 80. I can't believe it. But her and her husband, John, they're two of my favorite humans on earth, for many, many layers of reason. But when I've spent lots of time with them over the years, and they had this habit, this very routine way of, of having a square of dark chocolate every night after dinner, and their dinner is like 7:30, and they have one square. And I'm always looking at, for someone that is all or nothing in a lot of ways. I've found a little more balance on that. There's a good side to that, and there's a downside to that. Don't just have one coffee, have umpteen kind of thing. But I've always been baffled by that. I do know it's more John than Nancy, but that sort of balance thing. So I just want to say that about dark chocolate before I ask you one other question, and then we'll get right back to where we need to go. Any comments on that for those of us out there thinking about, not just the caffeine within things and how it's affecting our sleep, but the urges that we have, that are sugar connected or caffeine connected?
Well, knowing John and Nancy, I'm really not surprised by that story.
No,
I'm
me
not a
neither.
one square person. So I can see John
Yeah.
doing that. But it wouldn't, there's no way
Yeah,
I'm
I
going to
know,
stick
I
to
know.
one square.
Anyway, you all have your version of the. For me, I could probably do that with chocolate. With other things, I could not do that with. It's so. I also, as you speak about sugar, I'm going to ask you when you start back up again to spell that system that you mentioned, the orexia system.
Orexin,
I
Orexin.
have never even heard that term. So if you have, you're ahead of me. So that's the cool thing about what Stuart does. That's what he does all day, every day. He's digging more, digging deeper, synthesizing, reflecting, applying, figuring out how it all fits, and then how to bring it to all of you in all kinds of different ways. But I wanted to think just for a moment about sugar because, um, and we use this language of energy sometimes interchangeably. People will talk about that kid has too much energy, so he has to go blow the energy off in the playground, right? And maybe he does. Maybe that is exactly what that child needs to do is move, but it's not what we're seeing, right? What we're seeing is something quite different from this healthy, good feeling. Like
Good point.
energy feels good. We talk a lot about finding our calm, but it's
That's a
not
great
just
point.
calm. I'm going to go do in a Zen studio. It's energy. It feels good. I can do the things that I want to do, focus, and that kind of can be very, so there's we sort of throw this word around in all kinds of different ways. And Halloween always comes to mind when I hear talk of candy and sugar, because if I'm in a room with educators, early childhood or school, of any kind, it's this common thing that the day everybody knows November 1st is an UG day. Lots of places, in their wisdom, have professional learning days on that day, and it's sort of a joke, and yet everybody knows that the kind of the week of Halloween and the day right after is a rough one, and there's this underlying assumption that it's all about the sugar. It's all about how much candy they consumed that particular night. And self-reg, we've talked before about how all five domains, and it's a whole lot more complex than that. But I know that many people assume there's this direct connection and it's a one size fits all. I consume a ton of sugar and I'm hyperactive, peel me off the walls. And everybody assumes that sugar makes kids hyper. And it's like this direct, I consume sugar, I'm hyper. And it's a lot more complex than that.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. So what Susan's saying here takes us back to the caffeine story. Okay, so we've got this condition now. We've eaten the sugar, and we've got this hyperglycemia, which just means too much glucose in the bloodstream. And now the brain has to it has to get rid of it. It has to bring it back, and so it triggers the release of catecholamines. And amongst those catecholamines are adrenaline. So two types. So what we're really seeing is the brain's reaction to the hyperglycemia is to release adrenaline, which causes hyperarousal. It causes neural hyperarousal and it causes physiological hyperarousal. And so Susan's making exactly the right point. You can't somehow, you can't have this mysterious source of energy that I can just consume, or maybe I can get energy from colors or chimes or whatever. That you are triggering a system deep inside the brain, which is recruiting your backup energy. So if the kid is having this adrenaline rush, which is what the sugar has caused, that adrenaline is tapping into energy reserves. That's how this emergency system works. And that's why November 1st is a disaster, because now the brain has to recover. And it takes many hours to recover from an adrenaline rush. So the deeper point here is when we're talking about, um, you or your age is your energy. It has to be
Yeah.
real energy, not adrenaline, not dopamine, because dopamine also produces psychic energy. Again, another of the catecholamines. We're talking about real energy. We're talking about the energy, and Susan had a very nice little line. It's the one where you do wake up the next on November 1st and you feel great. So now we learn something very interesting about the brain, and that is that it will it will produce that natural energy. It will produce if you let it. And so, what that means is very interesting. And what it means is that once it starts to have this, whatever it is, and we'll end up talking about what it is, this natural energy, it does some very interesting things. Let's take one example. It repairs cellular damage. Cells break, the ends of the cells break, and it repairs it. Adrenaline does the opposite. Adrenaline causes cellular damage. So when I am restoring, not only am I repairing the ends of my cells, which are called telomeres, I am there's an awful lot of wear and tear on your internal organs. And that was the whole point of Hans-Selye theory of the general adaptation syndrome. So I am repairing my liver. I'm repairing my kidneys. They all they go through wear and tear. We got to repair them. I'm repairing my immune system. Immune system takes an awful lot of energy. So I'm building up my immune system. One of the big problems that we see in burnout is inflammation. And there's a whole big movement going on right now in neuroscience called brainflammation, inflammation in the brain. And so what you're doing when you are restoring your energy is you are reducing inflammation in the brain and in the body. And finally, you are restoring energy. You're restoring those reserves that were depleted by the hyperglycemia, depleted by the adrenaline. So not only, when you've done this properly, not only do you feel younger, in a real sense, you are younger. Your body is healthier. Your brain is healthier. So if we can do this naturally, and that's where we're going to end up, if we can do this naturally, we're not tricking the brain into giving me that momentary feeling of a buzz. We are literally rolling back the clock. We are counteracting. I don't need plastic surgery.
Yeah.
I need to restore.
And it's so interesting to think about this idea of chronic inflammation, and adrenaline. I did not know about brain inflammation. I'll look it up, but I do know about the growing, you've talked about it before, about the concern about, this chronic inflammation serving a very important purpose but we're not meant to be
Yes, it is.
chronically, to be chronically in that state and all that it interrupts. And it's it just reminds me of this week of remembering that all these systems are interconnected. So that's the cool thing about self-reg and the science, that we move past these oversimplified ideas. But I go to my hygienist this week,
exactly,
or end of last week, and she's like, "Your gums are a little, there's some inflammation there." Why? And it's like, all the
interesting. You
same
didn't tell me that
things,
one.
right? And anybody
That's
out there
so
want to ask their
interesting.
dentist, they all have been, and hygienists, they've all been trained in the connections between dental health and physical health. It's for the same reasons.
I've never,
Google it.
I've never heard
Yeah,
that. That is so cool.
it's real
No,
because
it makes
they see the
perfect
first
sense.
signs of inflammation, which if it's inflammation in the gums, there's inflammation somewhere else, right? Unless you can explain it with something, something. Yeah, very
How
self-reg.
cool is that?
All right, take us to where we need to go next, Stuart.
Well, now we get to the end of our today's journey because what self-reg is. Hang on, my little doggy wants to go play with the other doggy now.
Well, while you're doing
Okay,
that,
off you
for
go.
those that were watching the video, you're watching my dog, Sophie, behind me. what
I
it
thought.
No, what it is
So
there's
she's gone
bunnies
now.
upstairs, and she she didn't notice them before, and then all of a sudden she's hyper aware of every movement. There's two bunny rabbits up there, and every sound. So she's on bunny alert right now. That's what's going on. Well, it's kind of,
How cool is
it
that?
was really cool at first. It's a little less so now. I wanted to forget the bunnies, but anyway, life when you live in a zoo.
Okay, so let's wrap this one up. So what self-reg is a pathway
Yeah.
to restoration. If you look at the 5 steps of self-reg, you will see that step 5 is restore. And the point that we stress is you can't get to restoration because you decide, well, I need to restore. You can't get to restoration as an act of will or as an act of, the blue brain reappraising your stress. You need a pathway, and that pathway does not stop at step 4. Step 4 in self-reg is called clear, calm, listening, and body awareness and reflection. That is the precursor. That is when you are ready now to get to step 5, the step of restoration. This is a point that Alan Fogle made very clear to you when you were doing when you were now. I wanted to end on one critical point. Okay, so now you've got in self-reg, you've got a pathway to feeling younger. You've got a pathway to having that natural energy. It is not a pathway that happens, well, I heard this podcast, it was really great, so I'm going to go do the 5 steps and tomorrow I'm going to wake up full of energy. This is a slow process. It took you a long time to get to burnout, and now by doing the 5 steps of self-reg, we're going to get back into that healthy, robust system where we're ready for spring. And I know we all are, but now I mean, okay. But there's a very important point. And Susan and I are going to be doing a course on this in the relatively near future. Am I allowed to? One of the problems that we have in the framework that we have inherited is this idea that somehow burnout is this isolated mind thing, that you're on your own, that you have to do something to replenish yourself. But the human brain is designed to get support from other brains when it needs it. One of the things that really just I found profoundly moving was that when Susan didn't feel well, the self-reg community reached out. I reached out. Her physician reached out. This is really a case of, as I just wrote for that piece I gave you, no man is an island unto himself, the famous John Donne quote. When we are burned out, we need other brains, we need interbrains to help us on the path to step 5, to restoration. Self-reg is about understanding what is healthy, what restores my energy. And one of the things that restores my energy, one of the critical pieces of this pathway to restoration is that others chip in, that we care for each other, that we trigger oxytocin. And when I didn't mention this in that piece, Susan, but one of the things that I found extraordinary was some research that's been done a couple of years ago, showing that just being kind to a stranger releases oxytocin in the stranger and in ourselves. And as you all know from what we've done in the first 9 episodes, the first 9 podcasts, we need oxytocin to start that healing pathway, start that healing trajectory. So personally, although my hand was up, I am burned out at the moment, but I am feeling so hopeful. I am feeling so positive. Politically, I see good things happening, but more importantly, I was given this gift, and I'll close on this. I was given this incredible gift last night, Susan, and the gift was that one of our self-regulars, Anne Showalter, did some work on one of my pieces, and she took what I did and turned it into something that is so much better than I could have done on my own. And that's what I do. That's what happens with these podcasts. That's what happens with these circles of communication.
And so I want to just close a few circles for all of you. The very first one that I want to mention is when Stuart says we're working within this framework, he doesn't mean the self-reg framework. He means self-controlism or the societal, message that it's all about, try harder and work harder and it's all within you and all of that. So that's a really important distinction. The second one I just want to close a loop on is Alan Fogle. So Alan Fogle, Stuart's done lots of work with Alan Fogle. He's a friend of Self-Reg. I did a book study with him, and Stuart has introduced me in a few ways. But his book on embodied self-awareness, talking about the difference between genuine restorative, it's a big mouthful, but restoration and just mitigated, where okay, I'm stressed out, so I'm going to go do some yoga. They're different, right? So that's one. And I want to just maybe full circle one thing for those of you fairly new to Self-Reg. By the way, all the things that Stuart are mentioning you can find on self-reg.ca. There is books coming, a series. There's actually 4 books. You'll have to wait and see to hear. But there's 2 chronicles, which are essays, writings from Stuart linked together, and there'll be courses with them. New writing, and that's part of what he's talking about with Anne here. Some very exciting things happening. We have something for early childhood coming, and we have something for education assistants coming. So you'll have to kind of wait to hear that. But there are also online courses that you can take. Our publications will be digital downloads as well, right? So keep all of that in mind. But when Stuart is talking about the 5 steps of self-reg, I moved across the country to work with Stuart, so 7, 8, 9 years ago, I guess now, and so clearly all of it has always resonated with me from the moment that I first met him over a decade ago now. But along the way, I learned more, and he expands on some of the thinking. So reframing was really, so I'm just going to want to just touch base on those for those of you new, and please go and take courses if you're curious. There's lots of this in all kinds of ways that you can learn more. Go read the reframing. Reading and reframing, it started with behavior, but it's also, we read and reframe all kinds of things. Concept. Last year you did something on polarization, political polarization. Right. And it's more than just this aspect shift. The word reframe is the buzzword. It's everywhere now. Stuart is not just, I once wanted to use this image of a camera, and he's like, it's the wrong image, right? And the reason he said that was because it's not just, I'm going to look at it from another point of view. It is pulling apart the tenets, really unpacking, going into the science and then putting them back together in ways that make sense, right? So there's so much to reframing, and you've got to be able to see differently for the other ones to make sense. Otherwise, you're believing that you're still in a self-control paradigm. Recognizing stressors is a huge one. So that's the second one. It's the 5 domains. We did a whole podcast, a couple of them in the early parts on this. The big one, I just want to tell you, my big aha there was moving beyond getting stuck and saying, okay, The problem is the parents are fighting all the time, and he's coming to school with, or coming to the center with, a can of soda for breakfast. These are the problems I need
Yeah.
to change. Yeah, okay. You just heard about sugar and caffeine, and yeah, but that's not really what we're thinking of. We're thinking of stressors as operating on the brain and body, and the magic is the hidden ones. Never underestimate that the power of recognizing the little things that when you began, and even if you're trying to find your way out of a stress storm, or it's the little things. Okay, I can't change that. I've been a
Yeah.
single mom most of
Yeah.
my life. I can't just turn everything off and go to a yoga retreat for a week, or become. I told Stuart this year that if I didn't have a kid, I could have gone and been a hermit in the woods for a month. I could have. I would have been just fine, right? I can't do that. I have responsibilities. But what can I do? So that it's a different question. Where can I, and what do I think is actually helping me, but is actually a stressor? So it's an honest conversation without
Yes.
judgment. The third one is reduce the stress. And so we've always talked about that. This is where whenever anybody tells me I've got this great program, it works terrific, or I've got this great strategy, it's not, if it actually works, like, you've got to be honest with yourself. Works for who? And is it actually working for the kid? And sometimes those, we can convince ourselves of things, but if it really does, it fits under step 3. So sometimes people will say that it's the other way around. Self-reg fits. No. From my perspective, it's the broad life framework, right? This is haven oriented, but it fits under step number 3, and it means it genuinely is reducing the stress, right? And that's co-regulation,
Yes.
that's relationship, that's, sometimes that's changing routine. There's all kinds of ways that we can do that. But we've been talking more about reducing the stress load, which I love, because it's thinking, okay, the stressors, the backpack metaphor that you use, Stuart. And okay, what are a couple, if I could take a couple stones, I'm pulling my hair, a couple stones out of my backpack, it might just lighten it up enough. And I'm not trying to um, to to behavior manage. I'm not doing this so they'll do that or I'll do this. I'm like saying, okay, if I can lighten that backpack just a bit, you can handle things. This is the biggest gift for me as a parent, to be honest with you, for my parenting, this particular one, because that's what I focus on in really tough times. I have a teenager. Yesterday was one. Okay, can you do? And there's things I haven't even shared with Stuart, and Stuart's like an uncle to Sienna. But I didn't focus on fixing. I focused on lightening the load so that she can solve her own problems.
That's good.
It's a real gift. And it's some of the magic for those of you saying the kids are off the wall. What am I going to do? It's so different post COVID, or COVID. You're right. We're hearing that everywhere. Anxiety. What can I do? Noticing I'm stuck in that control. I'm still trying to manage behavior, even though I say I'm not. I still want that child to do this. And instead it's like, okay, what's blocking that? Where can I lighten? Less lineups, the lights off, how you respond when they
Yeah.
mess it up. We got to watch ourselves there, right? How do we not amp things up? So number 4 was a gift too, because step 4 it is the reflection step. We use the 5 R's, but we've updated that to calm, to the clear metaphor. And it was all Stuart's ideas, but we'll give a shout out to Rebecca Leslie, who reworded some words and made it out to clear. So thank you, Rebecca, another self-regger. It was caller at first and clear sense. But it's calmness,
Yes, it
it's
was.
interoception. Those of you working with the interoception stuff, there's some terrific new science, and it's what is going on within me, right? Really noticing me, and so it's the internal and the external, which you've long been talking about, you and your exteroception baths. And um, that's the one that now I have a
Yes.
great sense of interoception, and I think I had zero when I wrote. I remember writing you, and I'm like, I don't think I even know. Just this total disconnect. So super, super, super helpful, and really
Yeah.
helpful in our relationships. How do kids learn to self-regulate? It's having that feeling understood, and that over and over and over again, and laying the layers of it with co-regulation. But we can't do that if we aren't calm, and able. It's calm. It's not just I'm going to go do yoga. It's this, I'm here. I listened to something with Ellen Langer yesterday that you always talk about. talk about her in our courses. But
Yeah,
she
yeah.
decides to describe mindfulness very simply as awareness for differences, for things that are different, right? So just long, and just being able to notice things that are different in your environment internally, and just that really present moment kind of stuff versus the on autopilot mindless stuff. Stuart does lots of this on in foundations, by the way, if you're interested. So that's a really, really important one. But that is just the awareness piece is really important. But the magical one that has really been a game changer for me in my own journey, which I need to be feeling okay. You said to me last week or a couple of weeks ago, we have some changes coming. This also needs to be fun, right? Which translates to happy and healthy for us,
Yeah.
right? We're on this mission, and yet you have to be able to answer the at what cost, and it's an important one, but it's the restoration. I always looked at step five sort of as that nice add-on, and almost like it was like, oh, a strategy. I'm going to go run or do yoga or whatever, or I'm going to read my book, and it's not. It can be those things. It's so much deeper. You talk about it as, that feeling you feel in moments of awe. Fogle talks about it even in the restorative feeling in grief, that feeling that we feel in a deep movie that we watch and we just feel deeper. But to me, it is the priority. And it's the priority for your kids on Halloween that you're peeling off the walls. Because some of them you're not peeling off the walls and you're like, oh, they're fine. They ate less candy. Maybe not. Their systems are dealing with it in all kinds of different ways. What do those kids need? They don't need more sit downs and corners and stickers and okay, even use your words, which I actually really believe is terrific, but it's got to be in the right teachable moment, helping kids figure things out. You can't do that in the moment. What do they need? Well, think about the restoration side of things, because some of these kids just get in trouble all day long, and some of us just run all day long. Where can we begin to find these little moments and micro moments, but making more and more and more of them? And that's, for me, that's the path out, to be honest with you. I'm pretty natural at the self reg. I miss stuff all the time, but the restore is the really big one for me right now, because I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go to this vice, or I don't even know if you know, but I quit alcohol completely a year ago. It's actually right about now, and I was in the very big habit of a glass of wine a day, or maybe a beer, and then over COVID it became sometimes two. I'm not usually more. I don't. I had my party days. I do not like waking up not feeling well. But I had a scare with my daughter a year ago, Stuart, and you know this. I just don't talk about. I haven't really publicly told anybody about the alcohol before, but I had a real big scare and realized that teenagers do what teenagers do. But I had a bunch of alcohol that I don't like hard liquor, so it was in a cupboard I never even touched, and so I never really thought about it. Sometimes you get them as gifts and things like that, and it just sort of was there. I don't even know for what, and that that was something that she was into, and more than just a little. And I got rid of every drop in the house because I was like literally trying to reduce her stress. Okay, so if it's not in the house, at least there's a piece of that. But then after that got under control, I'm like, you know what? I'm not. I actually feel better without it. I knew some of the science about the cigarette like research that's suggesting it's a toxin, and so I got rid of that, and that has helped me with my restoration. So food is my other go-to, right? So it's beginning to find your way out of things, but think, okay, that's Sophie listening for bunnies. But it's really beginning. That's my big mall, and that to me is the magic. Is how do I get to the genuine? She's on bunny watch. How do I get to the genuine restorative that it just feels good, and I'm not trying. I just feel good, and I'm having more and more glimpses. I'm feeling better. You've told me today I look, the energy is back. But it's a little by little. It's a day by day. I'm not out either, and so I know many of you are
Yeah.
along the path with me. So I'm curious. I'm going to throw it to Stuart for the final word. But any of you that anything I just shared or we shared resonates with, please respond. We'd love to hear from you. It helps us figure out where we're going to go next on our weaving journey of trying to bring you something meaningful in these self-reg pods. So over to you, Stuart. Final word.
I'm going to let everybody in on one of Susan's secrets. So, one of the ways that Susan restores
Yeah.
is through gardening. So I want everyone to look over Susan's right shoulder. And what struck me when I saw that, I thought, I mean, not just that it's gorgeous, look how healthy they are. Look how vibrant her monstera is, which is, by the way, the grandparent of my monstera. So if you want a metaphor today's podcast, just think about those beautiful houseplants behind her and how restorative it is, not just for her, but for me, for all of you who can see that. So we have this wonderful line that this is Susan's: calmness begets calmness, while restoration begets restoration. Care
I
begets
love
care.
it. And find your way to people. So very much like Stuart said, that support you and that see beyond the behavior. And
Yeah.
that's the TMC crew, and but also the
Yes.
wider community that you talked about, Stuart. You
Pretty big. Yeah, it's a
and I'm
pretty
not
big
many people
community
have a
now.
boss like you that I'm like, you're like, you take more time off. I took 2 weeks, right? So fine, but there are people out there, and if you're feeling that you don't have that in your circle, reach out to this community. There's Facebook groups. There's there's all sorts of places. Come to Summer Symposium. We're here with you. So I'm going to call it a day. I wanted to give a shout out to our new producers, Two Blue Shirts, Aiden and Aaron. They're
Hey
not new
guys.
to us. They've filmed every video we've ever done in courses, but they're taking over the podcast. So thanks very much, and we will be sure to share this. We're trying to reach and help as many folks as we can, or at least spark an interest. So please. Share, add the like, follow us, and we'll see you for episode 11, or actually 12. 11 is with Dr. Rosati. But thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care. Bye, Stuart.